So this is a little window into how we do things here. You know, what I'm reading right now, this intro, was actually written by one of my producers, and I actually ask multiple people what their take is on the Epstein release. What matters? What doesn't matter? Why? Because perception is reality on this. Okay, it really is what you want it to be. They've released nearly 30,000 pages. Okay,
I want to talk to you about what's really happening with these Epstein document releases, because there's a massive disconnect between what people are seeing online and what's actually in these files. And that gap, that confusion, is being deliberately created by a Justice Department that seems more interested in managing perception than delivering transparency.
A lot of pages? Oh, great. So are you satisfied? Of course not, right? It's about what's in them. A lot of redactions. Okay. The law is pretty clear for a law that you're only allowed to redact things that fit into a few categories. Okay. One of those categories is not that people are going to be embarrassed and that they may want to sue because you've made them notorious for an allegation that you could not substantiate.
We've got nearly 30,000 pages released, which sounds impressive until you realize that quantity means nothing if the quality is garbage. And right now, we're getting documents so heavily redacted, so strategically obscured, that they raise more questions than they answer. Let me start with something that's been all over social media.
Okay, so what are they going crazy about? Online. Exactly that. Did you see the letter that Epstein wrote to convicted pedophile Larry Nassar, mentioning our president? Huh? Did you see that? See it? It's all over, right? Oh, you have seen it. Oh, great. Does everybody who show it to you say that the DOJ says the letter is fake? Talk about what they should have redacted. If it's fake and you know it's fake, why would you release it? You see how?
A letter supposedly written by Jeffrey Epstein to Larry Nassar, the convicted USA gymnastics pedophile, that mentions our president and talks about their shared love of young girls. That letter has exploded across the internet, being shared millions of times, cited as proof of Trump's involvement in Epstein's crimes. And here's the kicker.
Crazy are we? How crazy are we? So you know this is fake, and you're releasing it into a Thunderdome where people weaponize information for profit. How is it making anything better? If you get us the names of people who knew or may have benefited from Epstein's disgusting behavior.
The Department of Justice says that letter is fake. They know it's fake. They've stated publicly that it's fake. So why the hell did they release it? Think about that for a second. If you're the Justice Department and you're going through these files and you come across a document that you know is fabricated, that you can prove is not authentic, why would you include it in a public release, especially when you know damn well that misinformation spreads faster than corrections ever will? That letter is now permanently part of the public consciousness around this case. Millions of people have seen it and believe it's real, and no amount of after-the-fact clarification is going to change that. So either the DOJ is incompetent beyond belief, or they deliberately released fake material, knowing it would create chaos and confusion that would ultimately benefit someone. And it's not just fake letters. The redactions in these documents are absolutely insane. We're talking about files that look like oil slicks, so much black ink covering names and details that you can barely tell what you're looking at. Now, there is a law that governs what can and cannot be redacted in these releases. The Epstein Transparency Act is pretty clear about the limited categories of information that can be withheld. You can redact to protect ongoing investigations. You can redact to protect victim identities if they haven't chosen to go public. You can redact certain classified information if it meets specific national security criteria. But here's what the law does not allow. You cannot redact something simply because releasing it might embarrass someone. You cannot redact because the person named might sue for defamation. You cannot redact because you decided years ago that you couldn't build a prosecutable case. None of those are legitimate reasons under the statute, and yet that appears to be exactly what the Justice Department is doing with these files. They're protecting people not because the law requires it, but because those people are powerful and connected and would prefer to remain anonymous. After Epstein's arrest in 2019, the FBI was actively trying to contact what they called 10 co-conspirators, 10 people who were allegedly involved in or benefited from Epstein's trafficking operation. The Department of Justice has redacted every single one of those names. Why? What possible legal justification exists for hiding the identities of people the FBI itself designated as co-conspirators in a sex trafficking ring? These aren't victims. These aren't witnesses who might be endangered. These are allegedly people who participated in or enabled crimes against minors. There's also a memo that prosecutors wrote shortly after Epstein died about potential charges against co-conspirators. Again, all the names are blacked out. So we have documentation that the government was considering charges, which means they had evidence they thought could support prosecution, but we're not allowed to know who those people are or why charges were ultimately never filed. That's not transparency. That's a cover-up with a veneer of compliance. The question becomes, where does this leave us? We've got this massive document dump that on the surface looks like the government is finally being forced to reveal what it knows about Epstein. But when you actually dig into what's been released, it's mostly noise. Fake letters that shouldn't have been included, legitimate documents rendered meaningless by excessive redaction, names hidden that should be public, and a whole lot of insinuation without actual information that could lead to accountability. Former federal prosecutor Jim Trusty made an interesting point that I actually have some sympathy for, even though it doesn't ultimately change my position. He argued that we don't usually go through prosecutors' files this way, that investigative files are messy and incomplete by nature, and that releasing them creates problems for victims who might not want certain details disclosed. He's not wrong about any of that. Prosecutors' files do contain sensitive information. They do include leads that didn't pan out, allegations that couldn't be corroborated, witness statements that might be unreliable. Opening all of that to public scrutiny is genuinely complicated. But here's where I part ways with that argument. This isn't a normal case. Jeffrey Epstein was operating what appears to have been a large-scale sex trafficking operation that involved some of the most powerful people on the planet. He did it for decades. Multiple prosecutions failed or resulted in sweetheart deals that let him continue. Victims have been demanding transparency and accountability for years. And most importantly, Congress passed a specific law requiring the release of these files because the normal processes of justice had so completely failed. So yeah, releasing investigative files is messy and unprecedented and creates complications. But you know what's worse? Allowing powerful people to escape accountability because we're too concerned about the messiness of transparency. The victims in this case have largely been asking for these files to be released. They want the truth out there. They want people to know who was involved and who looked the other way. Protecting the privacy and reputations of alleged perpetrators is not more important than giving victims the transparency they've been demanding. Geraldo Rivera brought up something crucial about how partisan this release has been. In the first document dump, Bill Clinton was featured prominently. Photos of Clinton on Epstein's plane, references to Clinton visiting the island, all of that front and center. Clinton has now come out publicly saying, release everything, all of it, no more selective leaks. And he's right to demand that because the way these documents have been released absolutely looks like political manipulation. Clinton gets blasted in the first batch, and Trump barely appears. Then later batches start including more Trump material, but it's released in ways that make it harder to find, harder to search, more obscured by redactions. There was literally a photo released showing Trump relaxing in what appears to be a hot tub, with someone's face completely blacked out next to him. The redaction creates this immediate assumption that maybe it's a minor, maybe it's someone inappropriate, maybe it's evidence of something illicit. Turns out the person whose face was redacted is a grown adult, with no connection to anything illegal. So why redact it? The only effect is to make people's imaginations run wild and create an impression that might not be accurate. This is information warfare being conducted by the Justice Department itself. They're not just releasing documents, they're curating a narrative, timing releases for maximum political impact, redacting strategically to create certain impressions while avoiding others. And in the process, they're including fake material that they know is fake, which poisons the entire well. How are we supposed to trust anything in these releases when we know some of it is fabricated and the DOJ released it anyway? The fundamental problem here is that insinuation is not transparency. Having 30,000 pages of documents means nothing if most of those pages are so heavily redacted that they're useless, or if some portion of them contains material the government knows is false. Real transparency would mean releasing the names of the 10 co-conspirators the FBI was pursuing. Real transparency would mean explaining why no charges were filed against people prosecutors were considering charging. Real transparency would mean showing us the decision-making process that led to some of the most powerful people on Earth escaping any consequences despite substantial evidence of their involvement. Instead, what we're getting is a carefully managed information release designed to satisfy the letter of the law while completely violating its spirit. Congress passed the Epstein Transparency Act because they recognized that normal DOJ processes had failed to deliver justice. The whole point was to force disclosure that wouldn't otherwise happen, but the Justice Department has found ways to technically comply while still hiding most of what matters. They release thousands of pages, but black out the important names. They include documents, but mix in fake material that discredits everything else. They time releases strategically to benefit certain political interests while harming others. And here's what really frustrates me about all of this. People's legitimate anger and demand for accountability is being channeled into fighting over documents that may or may not be real, arguing about redactions that may or may not be justified, and trying to piece together a picture from fragments when the government has the full picture and could just show it to us. We're being forced to do detective work with incomplete and sometimes fabricated evidence when the FBI has everything. They have the flight logs. They have the witness statements. They have the surveillance footage from Epstein's properties. They know who the 10 co-conspirators are. They know why charges weren't filed. They could tell us all of this clearly and completely. They're choosing not to. Jim Trusty said something else interesting. Nobody's ever going to be satisfied with these releases, and he's probably right, but not for the reason he thinks. It's not that the public has unreasonable expectations or that we're incapable of accepting that some allegations can't be proven. It's that we can see we're being played. We can see that the Justice Department is hiding information it shouldn't be hiding and releasing information in ways designed to confuse rather than clarify. When you do that, when you treat transparency as a game to be managed rather than an obligation to be fulfilled, of course, people aren't satisfied. The 10 co-conspirators are a perfect example. The FBI designated these people as co-conspirators back in 2019. That's not casual language. That's a specific legal determination that these individuals were involved in the conspiracy. And yet we don't know who they are. Some people have suggested that maybe these were financial institutions that later settled, that maybe co-conspirator doesn't mean what we think it means, and maybe that's true for some of them. But even if that's the case, we should know that. We should know who settled and for how much and what they settled for. We should know if any of the 10 were individuals who participated in abusing victims. We should know all of it. The fact that it's impossible to have hung out with Jeffrey Epstein without understanding what he was about is important. Everyone who spent time in his homes, on his plane, at his parties, they all knew. The artwork on his walls, the constant presence of young women and girls, the massage tables, the private island, all of it created an unmistakable vibe about what was happening. You don't accidentally miss that. You don't innocently associate with someone like Epstein for years without realizing what's going on. So everyone in that orbit has some level of culpability, even if it's just the culpability of choosing to look the other way because Epstein was useful or fun to be around. But knowing someone is a creep and choosing to remain friends with them isn't legally actionable. That's the frustration here. There are probably a lot of people who knew exactly what Epstein was doing, who maybe even participated in some ways that are difficult to prove in court, but who will never face charges because the evidence doesn't quite meet the criminal standard. That doesn't mean they're innocent. It just means they're legally untouchable. And the redactions in these documents are protecting those people, allowing them to maintain their reputations and positions while victims continue to suffer with the knowledge that their abusers face no consequences. This is where the legal and moral questions separate. Legally, maybe there are reasons why certain things can't be proven in court, why certain people can't be charged. Fine. But morally, the public deserves to know who was involved, who enabled this, who looked the other way, who benefited. The law requires that disclosure. Congress passed a statute specifically to ensure it happens, and the Justice Department is defying that statute using the technicality that they're releasing lots of pages, even though the important information is hidden. What makes this especially galling is that multiple administrations are complicit in this. The investigation spans from the early 2000s through 2019 and beyond. Files were created during Bush's presidency, Obama's presidency, Trump's presidency, and now releases are being managed during Trump's second term. So you've got bipartisan institutional investment in keeping certain things hidden. This isn't about Democrats protecting Democrats or Republicans protecting Republicans. This is the entire political establishment protecting itself and the powerful people who fund and influence it. The prosecutors who wrote memos about potential charges in 2019 and 2020 were working long after Epstein was arrested, and this was a major public scandal. Those aren't ancient history decisions made in a different era. Those are recent choices by career prosecutors who looked at evidence and decided charges were warranted, only to have someone higher up the chain decide not to proceed. We deserve to know who made those final decisions and why. We deserve to know what evidence existed and what standard it supposedly failed to meet. And the victims deserve so much more than what they're getting. They cooperated with investigations. They relived their trauma by giving detailed statements to FBI agents. They trusted that the system would deliver some measure of justice. Instead, they're watching documents get released with their abusers' names blacked out, with fake letters being mixed in that turn their suffering into a political football, with media coverage that focuses on partisanship and public relations rather than on what actually happened to them. This is why people don't trust institutions anymore. This is why faith in the Justice Department keeps declining. When you can see with your own eyes that powerful people are being protected, that transparency laws are being violated, that document releases are being carefully managed for political advantage, you stop believing that the system works. And maybe the system doesn't work. Maybe it's working exactly as designed, protecting the powerful while giving just enough appearance of accountability to prevent complete collapse of public trust. So, where does this leave us? We're not getting real transparency, despite nearly 30,000 pages being released. We're not getting accountability, despite evidence that multiple people beyond Epstein and Maxwell were involved. We're not getting honest answers about why decisions were made, why charges weren't filed, why investigations seemingly stopped short of following every lead. What we're getting is a carefully choreographed performance of transparency that's really just another layer of cover-up, more sophisticated than the previous versions, but ultimately serving the same purpose: protecting the powerful from the consequences of their actions while giving the public just enough information to argue about without ever getting to the truth.